I remember the day vividly, like it happened just yesterday. I was 16, caught in that awkward phase between childhood and adulthood, where everything felt either trivial or monumental. My family had planned a weekend getaway to our cabin by the lake, and as much as I loved those trips, I decided not to go this time. My teenage rebellion was in full swing, and the thought of spending a weekend in nature, away from my games and the internet, was just too unbearable. So there I was, sitting comfortably on the living room couch, the entire house to myself. My parents, along with my younger sister, had left early that morning, leaving me in charge. Well, almost. Uncle Mike was staying with us for a few days while his apartment was being renovated. He was supposed to be my chaperone, though his presence was more like having a really cool roommate. He had this grizzled charm, a kind of rugged handsomeness that came from years of military service and later working as a private investigator. As the hours stretched on, I settled into the blissful silence, enjoying the kind of freedom that only comes from being home alone. The house was quiet, the only sounds being the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant hum of the refrigerator. It was one of those rare sunny autumn days, where the golden light filtered through the windows, casting warm patterns on the walls and floor. I spent most of the morning lazing around, dressed in my old Star Wars t-shirt and a pair of comfortable flannel pajama pants. The house, a typical two-story suburban home, had always been a safe haven, a place filled with family laughter and love. The living room was particularly inviting, with its cozy couches, large flat-screen TV, and shelves crammed with books and family photos. At around 2 p.m., just as I was starting to feel the hunger pangs, Uncle Mike received a phone call. He was in the kitchen, his voice slightly muffled by the walls. I overheard bits and pieces of his conversation. Words like hospital and urgent floated into the living room, causing my ears to perk up. When he reappeared, his usually calm demeanor was replaced by a furrowed brow. "Hey, kid," he said, running a hand through his short, graying hair. "I need to head out for a bit. My mom's had a bit of a scare, and I need to see her." I nodded, trying not to let my relief show too blatantly. The prospect of being truly alone for a while was exciting in a way that only a teenager could understand. He promised he'd be back later that evening, and left me with a few parting words of advice about keeping the doors locked and not setting anything on fire. As Uncle Mike backed out of the driveway in his beat-up black sedan, I watched from the window, feeling a mix of apprehension and excitement. With him gone, the house took on a different feel. Quieter, almost eerie silence enveloped it, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something. I decided to raid the kitchen for snacks, loading my arms with chips, cookies, and a can of soda. My parents wouldn't be back until Sunday, and Uncle Mike's promise to return soon did little to dispel the feeling that I had the place all to myself. Back on the couch, I flicked through the TV channels, settling on a classic horror film. Kind that was cheesy enough not to be scary, but still enjoyable. The afternoon passed uneventfully, the sunlight gradually fading, casting long shadows through the windows. It was around 6 p.m. when I first noticed it, the feeling that something was off. The air seemed thicker, as though it were charged with electricity. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my imagination running wild. The film had reached its climax, a particularly suspenseful scene where the protagonist was trapped in a dimly lit hallway when I heard it. A soft thud from upstairs, like something had fallen or been knocked over. I paused the movie and listened intently, my heart beginning to thump a little harder against my ribs. Houses make noises, I told myself. It was probably just the wind, or maybe a book falling off a shelf. Yet, as I sat there, straining to hear more, the silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease that had begun to creep in. After all, I was alone in a house that had always been safe and familiar to me. What was there to be afraid of? I pressed play, trying to focus on the film, but the scene's tension seemed to seep into the room around me, heightening my senses. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside became amplified, setting my nerves on edge. Then came the phone call. The abrupt ringing cut through the tension like a knife, making me jump. My heart skipped a beat, and I fumbled for the cordless phone on the coffee table. the echo of the ringtone still reverberating in my ears. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice wavered slightly. Silence. Complete and utter silence greeted me on the other end. "Hello?" I repeated, a bit louder this time, hoping to hear Uncle Mike's reassuring voice, or perhaps a neighbor who had dialed the wrong number. Nothing, just a quiet, unsettling void, like the line had gone dead the moment I picked up. I held the phone for a few more seconds, straining to catch any hint of noise or static, but there was nothing. My own breath seemed too loud, echoing back at me as I stood there, the silence stretching on. Cold shiver snaked down my spine, and I slowly placed the phone back on its cradle. Maybe it was a prank call, I thought, trying to rationalize the sudden unease that had settled over me. Maybe some neighborhood kid thought it would be funny to mess with the house left unattended. With a forced laugh, I returned to the couch, though my earlier comfort had been replaced by a gnawing apprehension. The shadows in the room seemed deeper now, the light outside dimming as the evening took hold. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like an unknown entity, holding its breath, waiting. I shook off the feeling and tried to refocus on the TV, but my mind kept wandering back to the noise upstairs, the strange call. Every now and then, I'd glance towards the staircase, half expecting to see something or someone lurking at the top, watching me. But of course, nothing was there. Just the stillness of the hallway and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, a rhythmic reminder that I was alone. Or so I thought. Evening wore on, and as darkness enveloped the house, it seemed to breathe differently. The once welcoming rooms were now cast in deep shadows, their familiar corners taking on sinister shapes in the flickering light of the TV. My earlier excitement had faded, replaced by an uneasy feeling that seemed to settle like a cold fog. At around 7 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. The warmth from the setting sun was replaced by a chill that seemed to seep through the walls, making the air feel thicker. I wrapped myself tighter in the old, scratchy blanket draped over the couch, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. The movie I was watching was now a mere backdrop to the odd sensations prickling my skin. First sign that something was wrong came in the form of a series of faint thuds from upstairs. First, they were so soft that I could easily attribute them to the house settling or the wind playing tricks on the wooden floors. But as the minutes ticked by, the sounds grew more insistent, or deliberate. It was as if someone, or something, was methodically moving around up there. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just the house adjusting to the cooler night air. But with each thud, my heart pounded a little harder. I found myself glancing up the staircase, expecting to see a shadow or movement in the dim hallway light. The anxiety began to gnaw at me, making every creak of the floorboards below seem amplified. Around 7:30, the phone rang again. This time, I felt a jolt of panic, my pulse quickening as I snatched the receiver off the hook. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my words came out shaky. The silence on the other end was even more oppressive than before. Dead air, thick with an almost palpable tension. I strained to hear anything, but the line remained eerily quiet. It was as if the call was coming from a void, a place where silence reigned supreme. After a few moments of waiting, I hung up, my mind racing. I thought about calling Uncle Mike, but my earlier attempt had been fruitless. I was tempted to call my parents. Something held me back. An inexplicable feeling that I shouldn't disturb them, as if doing so would somehow make things worse. By 8 p.m., the house was shrouded in complete darkness. The only light came from the TV, casting a ghostly glow over the room. The air had grown colder, and I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. I decided to make a quick trip to the kitchen to grab a drink, hoping that a change of scenery might help clear my mind. As I walked through the dimly lit hallway, I noticed something strange. The hallway seemed longer, the shadows stretching unnaturally. I reached the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, trying to steady my nerves. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, and it felt oddly comforting amidst the growing unease. But then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of something shifting upstairs. It was louder this time, a dragging noise that sent chills racing down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest as I set the glass down, my hand trembling slightly. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was just a loose pipe or some other harmless cause. Returning to the living room, I noticed that the TV remote, which had been on the couch, was now on the kitchen counter. I stared at it, my mind racing. Had I moved it and forgotten? Or was something, or someone, moving things around? The unsettling thought made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. The house seemed to be holding its breath, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a whispered threat. I tried to focus on the TV, but the movie's suspenseful scenes only seemed to heighten my own growing fear. The once comforting glow of the screen now felt like a spotlight illuminating the darkness lurking just beyond its reach. Around 9 p.m., I decided to investigate the noises. Armed with a flashlight and a shaky resolve, I climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier, the sound of my footsteps resonating louder than the thuds that had been troubling me. The staircase creaked under my weight, and I imagined someone, or something, creeping up behind me, ready to pounce. At the top of the stairs, I paused, trying to steady my breathing. The hallway was dark, with only the faintest light filtering through the partially closed door of my room. The dragging noise had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I made my way to my room, flashlight casting erratic beams of light that danced across the walls. My room was exactly as I'd left it, except for the figures on my desk. My collection of action figures, which had been neatly arranged, were now positioned in a circle, their tiny faces turned inward. The sight of them made my blood run cold. My hands shook as I took in the scene. I wanted to scream, to call out, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. I turned to leave, my flashlight beam sweeping across the room one last time. As I did, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like someone brushing their lips against my ear. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. My heart raced, my mind spinning with 1,000 scenarios. What was happening? Was I going mad, or was something truly lurking in the shadows? Gripping the flashlight tightly, I stumbled back down the stairs, the weight of the silence almost unbearable. I wanted to call Uncle Mike, but I knew he wouldn't be back for hours. I was alone, truly alone, and the house felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The darkness seemed to press in around me as I returned to the living room, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. The house had changed, transformed into something menacing and unknown, and I was left to face whatever was hiding in the shadows, waiting for the night to reveal its secrets. As the night deepened, so did the sense of dread that clung to me like a second skin. The once familiar house had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and unsettling noises. TV, now muted and dark, cast eerie reflections across the room as I sat on the couch, trying to steady my racing heart. Around 10 p.m., the tension in the house felt almost palpable. I could feel it pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Every creak of the house seemed to echo louder. Every shadow seemed darker. Phone had rung again. Single, chilling ring left me staring at the receiver with a mix of fear and anticipation. I didn't answer this time, unable to shake the feeling that it was better not to engage whatever presence was tormenting me. I attempted to distract myself by searching through the kitchen cupboards for something. Anything. Ground me in reality. Clinking of dishes and the rustling of plastic seemed absurdly loud in the oppressive silence. I poured myself another glass of water, my hands unsteady, and took slow sips, hoping to calm my nerves. Just as I was about to return to the living room, a sudden, violent crash echoed from upstairs. The sound was so sharp, so sudden, that it made me flinch. It was followed by a series of rapid, chaotic thuds, as though someone or something was rushing around up there in a panic. My breath caught in my throat. Crashing sounds grew louder, more frantic. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knew I had to investigate. The thought of confronting whatever was making those noises filled me with a paralyzing fear. With trembling hands, I grabbed a large kitchen knife from the drawer, its cold steel a meager comfort against the encroaching terror. I held the knife tightly, the metal biting into my palm as I edged toward the stairs. The darkness seemed to swirl around me as I ascended, the only light coming from the dim beam of my flashlight. Each step creaked ominously beneath my weight, the sound magnifying the eerie quiet that had settled over the house. I reached the top of the stairs, a hallway stretching out before me like a dark, gaping maw. The noise had stopped. Sudden silence was more unnerving than the sounds had. I moved cautiously down the hallway, flashlight's beam casting jittery shadows that danced along the walls. My room was just ahead, but I found myself drawn to the sound of something shifting. Soft, almost imperceptible movements coming from the guest room. The guest room had always been just a spare room, place to store old furniture and dusty books. It was usually locked. Now the door stood ajar, creaking slightly with each draft. I approached it slowly, the flashlight's beam trembling as I peered inside. The room was a mess. Books and papers were strewn across the floor, and the once neat bed was disheveled. My heart sank as I noticed that the small desk in the corner was now toppled over, its contents scattered like a chaotic sea of objects. I stepped into the room, floor creaking ominously under my weight. The air was colder here, and I could see my breath puffing out in white clouds. I scanned the room, trying to make sense of the disarray, when I spotted something that made my blood run cold. On the wall opposite the bed, someone had written something in what looked like a dark, smeared substance. Perhaps blood. The words were barely legible, scrawled in a frantic, jagged script. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows over the words. "You can't hide." I recoiled in horror, the message searing itself into my mind. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls seeming to pulse with an unseen, malevolent energy. Desperate to escape the oppressive feeling of the room, I turned to leave, but then I noticed something else. The closet door was slightly ajar, and from within came a low, guttural sound, a noise that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the house's darkness. It was like a growl, a whispering breath of something unseen and terrifying. I approached the closet, my flashlight beam faltering as I swung it towards the door. The closet was empty, save for a few old coats and a pile of boxes. But as I peered inside, the sound grew louder, more insistent. It felt like it was coming from just behind me, a chilling presence that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I stumbled back, my legs feeling like lead. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be lurking in the darkness. I needed to get out of the house, to escape whatever was tormenting me. My heart pounded furiously as I turned and bolted down the hallway, my flashlight casting wild, erratic beams of light as I fled. I reached the stairs and almost tripped, my pulse pounding in my ears. I hurried down, barely noticing the cold sweat clinging to my skin. As I reached the bottom, I turned back, half expecting to see something, or someone, chasing me. But the stairs were empty. The house silent once more. I slumped onto the couch in the living room, the knife still clutched in my hand. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to process what had just happened. The house was still, too still, and the oppressive silence was almost worse than the earlier noises. It was then that I noticed something else. The TV, which I had left off, was now on. The screen was filled with static, the white noise a harsh, chaotic contrast to the darkness of the room. And on the screen, flickering through the static, was a single repeating image, a shadowy figure, barely discernible but unmistakably watching. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever was in the house with me wasn't going to let me forget it. Terror was far from over, and I was caught in its grip, waiting for the next chapter of this nightmare to unfold. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes like a relentless metronome, each second amplifying the thick, oppressive silence that now dominated the house. My heart was still racing, my breath coming in shallow bursts as I clutched the kitchen knife, the cold steel a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. The TV's static buzzed in the background, an unsettling accompaniment to the silence. The image on the screen, vague and shadowy, flashed intermittently, making me jump every time it shifted. The sight of that shadowy figure was like a phantom hovering at the edge of my sanity, a reminder that I was not alone in this house. Around midnight, exhaustion began to set in. Sleep was a distant luxury. I paced the living room, trying to stay awake, my mind reeling with the events of the evening. Every creak of the house seemed to echo louder than before. Every shadow seemed to twist into sinister shape. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a maze of horror, each room hiding secrets and threats. The whispers from the closet, the scrawled message on the wall, and the mysterious static on the TV played over and over in my mind. I knew I had to do something, anything, to regain control, to understand what was happening. I considered calling the police, but something held me back. The idea of explaining the bizarre occurrences felt absurd. Confession of madness. As I wandered through the darkened rooms, I noticed something strange. The front door, which I had locked earlier, was slightly ajar. A shiver ran down my spine as I approached it. Had I forgotten to lock it properly? Or had someone or something tampered with it? With a trembling hand, I pulled the door open, peering into the night. The street outside was bathed in moonlight. Calm and serene contrast to the chaos inside. I stepped out onto the porch, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The night was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. I turned back to the house, my flashlight casting long shadows across the porch. The familiar sight of the front yard, with its neatly trimmed bushes and garden gnome, felt oddly comforting. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and closed the door behind me, double-checking the lock. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed something strange on the doorstep. A small, handwritten note. It was folded neatly, the paper slightly crumpled. My hands shook as I picked it up, the chill of the night air seeping through my shirt. I unfolded the note and read the words, written in the same jagged script as the message on the wall. "You can never escape." The message sent a wave of cold terror through me. My fingers fumbled as I crumpled the note, stuffing it into my pocket. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me with a loud click, seemed to echo through the empty house. The silence that followed was even more oppressive, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Back in the living room, I tried to gather my thoughts. The static on the TV was still there, the shadowy figure occasionally flickering across the screen. I switched off the TV, the sudden silence a welcome relief, but it did little to dispel the dread hanging over me. Then I heard it. Soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the upstairs hallway. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like fingers drumming against wood. My blood ran cold as I realized it was coming from the same hallway where I had heard the crashes earlier. The sound grew louder, more insistent, like someone or something was drawing closer. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the rising fear, and made my way up the stairs. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown, the shadows growing darker and more menacing with each ascent. Tapping continued, a haunting drumbeat that resonated through the walls. At the top of the stairs I paused, my flashlight casting erratic beams of light. The hallway was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. I moved slowly, my eyes darting from one end of the hallway to the other. Tapping had stopped, replaced by a new sound. A soft, mournful wail, like a distant cry for help. I followed the sound to the guest room, the door still ajar. The room was cold, the air heavy with an unsettling chill. The disarray from earlier had not changed. The desk remained toppled, the books and papers scattered. I scanned the room, my flashlight's beam flickering over the mess. The wailing sound grew louder, more desperate. It was coming from the closet, a low, keening noise that sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated, my mind racing with dread and confusion. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and the weight of the house's secrets pressed heavily on my shoulders. I reached for the closet door, my hand trembling as I pulled it open. The closet was empty, save for the old coats and boxes. The wailing had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I swept the flashlight around the closet, but there was no sign of anything amiss. I turned to leave, my nerves frayed and my heart racing, when I noticed something strange. The wall behind the closet had been scratched, deep gouges marring the surface. The scratches formed a crude pattern, a series of jagged lines that seemed to spell out something I couldn't quite make out. As I stared at the scratches, a cold breath brushed against my neck, making me freeze. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, silent except for the distant ticking of the clock in the hallway. My breath came in ragged gasps, the terror threatening to overwhelm me. I stumbled back down the stairs, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. The house felt more oppressive than ever, each shadow seeming to twist and writhe with dark intention. I sank onto the couch, the knife still clutched in my hand, and tried to calm my racing heart. The night stretched on, the silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of the house settling. The TV remained off, its shadowy figure replaced by the stark reality of the empty room. Echoes of the past seemed to haunt me, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of my sanity. And as the night wore on, I knew that whatever was in the house with me was far from finished. The horrors were far from over, and the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter in this nightmare to unfold. The hours crept by, the darkness outside seeming to seep into the very walls of the house. Clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the uneasy quiet that had settled over the place. I sat huddled on the couch, the kitchen knife still clutched in my sweaty grip, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that seemed to curl around my spine. Around 2 a.m., the house seemed to shudder, a low, groaning sound that felt almost like a living entity. My pulse quickened as I glanced around, trying to make sense of the disturbance. It was as though the house itself was awakening, stirring from some long slumber, and the oppressive atmosphere only grew heavier. I decided to take a break from the living room, hoping that a change of scenery might calm my frayed nerves. I made my way to the kitchen, the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The quiet was suffocating. The stillness, broken only by the occasional clink of a dish or the rustle of a stray paper. As I approached the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The cabinet doors which I had left closed were now slightly ajar. The sight made my stomach churn, a knot of unease tightening in my gut. Had I been so distracted that I left them open, or had something been tampering with them? I cautiously opened the cabinet, my flashlight revealing nothing out of place. The shelves were lined with neatly arranged dishes and canned goods. I let out a shaky breath, trying to dismiss the feeling of being watched. The unease had become a constant companion, a shadow lurking just out of sight. I reached for a glass of water, hoping that a moment of normalcy might help ground me. As I filled the glass, the kitchen light flickered and dimmed, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. I glanced around, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, reaching out with invisible fingers. The flickering light seemed to draw my attention to the back door, which had been securely locked earlier. Now, it stood slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it seeming to beckon me with an eerie allure. My heart pounded as I approached the door, my flashlight casting a narrow beam across the night. The air outside was cold and heavy, filled with an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl. I hesitated at the door, my breath fogging up in front of me. The sense of foreboding was almost unbearable, and the thought of stepping outside into the darkness was terrifying. I reached out and pushed the door closed, making sure the lock clicked into place with a decisive snap. As I turned away from the door, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like a breath against my ear. The sound was so faint that I could barely distinguish it from the other eerie noises of the house. My heart raced as I strained to listen. The whisper was gone as quickly as it had come. I stumbled back to the living room, my nerves on edge. The TV was still off, but the feeling of being watched had intensified. The silence seemed to press in around me, a heavy blanket of unease. I tried to focus on the room, on the familiar sights of the couch and the coffee table, but the oppressive darkness made everything seem foreign and threatening. It was then that I noticed a new sound, a rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat, coming from the walls. The noise was slow and methodical, as if someone was tapping out a morose, deliberate rhythm. The sound was coming from the walls behind the couch, and each thump seemed to reverberate through the room, making my chest tighten with fear. I grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the source of the sound, the beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were solid, unremarkable, and there was no sign of anything amiss. The thumping continued, persistent, maddening beat that seemed to echo through the house. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the cold, unyielding surface beneath my fingers. The noise was louder now, more insistent. I glanced around the room, searching for any sign of what could be causing the sound. The shadows seemed to twist and writhe, creating eerie shapes that danced just out of the reach of the flashlight's beam. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the thumping stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, stark contrast to the rhythmic noise that had filled the room moments before. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of my own breathing loud in the oppressive quiet. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and sat back on the couch. Flashlight's beam wavered, casting jittery shadows across the room. The sense of dread had not diminished. If anything, it had grown more intense, a dark presence lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. Clock ticked on, each second stretching into eternity. I could feel the weight of the house's darkness pressing down on me, a suffocating blanket of fear. The shadows seemed to close in, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards and the distant, mournful howl of the wind outside. I knew that whatever was in the house with me was not finished. The night was far from over, and the darkness seemed to be gathering strength, waiting for the next move in this twisted game. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, and the horrors that awaited were far from over. The night dragged on like a black shroud, each minute stretching into a never-ending void. The oppressive silence of the house seemed to amplify the creeping terror that clung to me. I sat on the couch, clutching the knife, the only tangible link to some semblance of safety in this spiraling descent into madness. Around 3 a.m., the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, growing thicker and more menacing. The darkness felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that seeped into every corner of the house. The sense of being watched grew stronger, an invisible gaze that made my skin crawl. The TV, which had been off, flickered back to life with a burst of static, filling the room with its harsh, crackling noise. The shadowy figure on the screen was more distinct now, its form slowly solidifying into a grotesque silhouette. The figure seemed to move, its eyes, if you could call them that, fixated on me through the screen. The sight was enough to make my blood run cold. I switched off the TV with a quick jab at the remote, the sudden silence a jarring contrast to the static noise. But the sense of dread remained, a heavy weight pressing down on me. I needed to do something, to regain control, but my thoughts were a chaotic jumble swirling with fear and confusion. I decided to investigate the source of the rhythmic thumping that had plagued me earlier. The noise had stopped abruptly, but I could still feel its echo in my bones. Made my way to the wall behind the couch, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The thumping had seemed to come from within the walls, but now the walls were silent, betraying no sign of the eerie rhythm. As I ran my hands along the wall, I noticed a small, barely noticeable crack near the baseboard. Crack was so fine that it had been easy to miss, but now it seemed to beckon with an unsettling promise. Pressed my fingers against it, feeling the cool air that seeped through. Crack widened slightly under my touch, revealing a sliver of dark space beyond. I hesitated, my breath coming in short, anxious bursts. The darkness beyond the crack seemed to pulsate, as if it were a living entity waiting to be unleashed. With a deep breath, I pushed against the wall, forcing it open just enough to reveal a small, hidden compartment. Inside the compartment was an old, dusty box. My heart raced as I pulled it out, box feeling heavy and foreboding in my hands. It was covered in a thick layer of grime, surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the flashlight's beam. I wiped off the dust, revealing a lock that was old and rusty. I took a deep breath and pried the lock open with a trembling hand. The box creaked open, its hinges protesting with a low, mournful sound. Inside, there was a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age, and a stack of tattered letters. Photographs were faded and blurry, depicting scenes of what looked like the house in different times, somehow both familiar and alien. One photograph stood out, a picture of a family, their faces obscured by shadows, standing in front of what appeared to be this very house. The image was unsettling, the figures' eyes vacant, their expressions frozen in a mix of fear and despair. I couldn't shake the feeling that the family in the photo was somehow connected to the horrors I was experiencing. I picked up the letters, each one written in a hurried, almost frantic scrawl. The letters spoke of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, and an ever-present sense of dread. The writer of the letters seemed to be a previous resident of the house, someone who had experienced the same unsettling phenomena I was enduring now. One letter caught my eye. It was dated many years ago and addressed to a person named Evelyn. The letter described a growing sense of paranoia, fear of being watched, and a feeling of impending doom. The final words of the letter were chilling. "They are always here, just waiting. You can't escape their gaze. They know everything." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I read the letter. The sense of connection between the past and my present situation was undeniable. The house was haunted by more than just memories. It seemed to be a vessel for a deeper, more malevolent presence. As I read the last of the letters, a sudden violent gust of wind swept through the house, slamming doors and rattling windows. The sound was deafening, a chaotic symphony of creaks and crashes that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The wind howled through the hallways, its mournful cry mingling with the distant echoes of the earlier thumping. I scrambled to secure the letters and photographs, shoving them back into the box. The storm seemed to rage on, its fury intensifying with each passing minute. I could barely think, my mind racing with thoughts of the unseen force that seemed to be growing stronger. As I closed the hidden compartment, the wind suddenly stopped, leaving the house in an eerie, oppressive silence. The air felt thick and heavy, charged with an ominous energy that made my skin prickle. The sense of being watched was stronger than ever, and I knew that whatever was in the house with me was not finished. I sank onto the couch, the box clutched tightly in my hands. Flashlight's beam flickered and dimmed, casting long, jittery shadows across the room. The silence was almost unbearable, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm that had just passed. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter in this nightmare to unfold. I was trapped in a macabre game of cat and mouse, and the darkness seemed to be gathering its strength, preparing for whatever came next. The terror was far from over, and I could feel the weight of the house's dark secrets pressing down on me. Hi everyone, my name is Tom, and before we dive into the second story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to support us. This video features over an hour of spine-chilling content curated just for you. I'm thrilled you're here to experience these terrifying tales with us. Your support means everything. Now, let's get into the second story. For as long as I can remember, the old wooden house on the edge of town had always been shrouded in an unsettling aura. 15 years ago, it was the place I called home. To me, it was never just a house. It was a sentient entity that seemed to breathe, creak, and watch me with malevolent eyes. I lived there with my parents, who were oblivious to the house's eerie nature. They dismissed my fears as childish imagination, but I knew better. The house was alive, and it whispered secrets that only I could hear. It was a two-story structure, built long before I was born, with an exterior of weathered wood that seemed to weep in the rain. Paint peeled away like dead skin, and the windows, fogged with age, glared at the world outside as if harboring long-forgotten memories. The interior was no less forbidding. The walls groaned with every gust of wind, and the floorboards creaked ominously beneath my feet, as if the house was warning me to tread lightly on its ancient bones. The narrow staircase spiraled upwards, each step a distinct reminder of the years it had borne witness to. In the hallway stood a grandfather clock, tall and imposing, its relentless ticking echoing through the house like a countdown to some inevitable doom. Next to it, a series of family portraits lined the walls. Their eyes, painted with eerie precision, seemed to follow me wherever I went, as if judging my every move. The attic door was another source of my dread. No matter how many times I closed it, it would always end up slightly ajar, a narrow crack that seemed to beckon me with silent promises of secrets, best left undisturbed. I often wondered if something sinister lurked behind it, waiting patiently in the shadows. Nights in the house were the worst. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness cloaked the world outside, the house would come alive with sounds that defied explanation. It was as if the wooden walls absorbed the day's warmth, only to release a symphony of eerie noises at night. The wind would wail through the gaps in the walls, creating a haunting melody played alongside the incessant ticking of the clock. The first time I heard the voices, I was sitting alone in the living room. It was a chilly October night, and the wind was howling outside like a mournful specter. I was wrapped in a thick sweater and jeans, trying to keep warm in the drafty old house. My parents had gone to bed early, leaving me to my thoughts. As I sat there, a cup of hot chocolate growing cold in my hands, I heard it. Faint whisper that seemed to drift from the walls themselves. It was so soft at first that I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on my mind. But as I strained to listen, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They called my name, softly but insistently, like a distant conversation that danced just beyond my comprehension. "Come here." The voices beckoned, each syllable dripping with a chilling familiarity that sent shivers racing down my spine. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see some spectral figure looming in the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the flickering candlelight casting eerie shapes against the walls. Fear was palpable, cold knot in my stomach that twisted with every passing moment. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, a figment of my imagination born from too many scary stories and a house with too much character. Deep down, I knew better. The house was alive. It wanted something from me. The night stretched on, and the whispers faded into silence, leaving only the oppressive weight of the house's gaze upon me. I sat there, frozen in place, afraid to move or even breathe, lest I disturb whatever malevolent presence had chosen to haunt my home. It was then that I realized the truth I had always feared. I was not alone in the house. Never had been. The realization settled over me like a suffocating fog, leaving me with an uneasy certainty that the house had many more secrets yet to reveal. As I lay in bed that night, the darkness pressing in from all sides, I knew that sleep would not come easily. The house was alive, and its whispers were just the beginning of a nightmare that had only just begun. I awoke the next morning with an unsettling sense of relief, thankful that the previous night had passed without any more disturbances. The memory of the whispering voices still lingered, like a stubborn shadow that refused to fade away. I tried to dismiss it, attributing it to the quirks of an old house and a restless imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Days passed, each one bringing with it a growing unease that settled over me like a shroud. My parents, oblivious to the malevolent whispers that haunted our home, carried on with their daily routines. To them, the house was nothing more than an old structure with creaky floors and drafty windows, testament to the passage of time. They couldn't see what I saw, and I envied their ignorance. Then came the night that forever changed everything. It was a stormy evening, sky churning with dark clouds that threatened to unleash a torrent of rain upon the world. My parents had to leave for work, an unexpected obligation that couldn't be postponed. They assured me they'd return by morning and reminded me to lock all the doors. As they drove away, I stood by the window, watching their car disappear down the long, winding road. A sense of vulnerability crept over me, and I felt the familiar weight of dread settle on my shoulders. The house, now empty save for my presence, seemed to close in around me, its walls pressing in with an oppressive silence that was both suffocating and terrifying. The rain began to fall, a steady downpour that drummed against the roof and windows, creating a rhythmic melody that underscored the tension in the air. I sat in the living room, clutching a blanket tightly around me as if it could shield me from the house's insidious intent. The lamp beside me cast a warm glow, pushing back the shadows that lurked in every corner. Hours slipped by, each one stretching into eternity as the storm raged outside. I tried to distract myself with a book. The words blurred together, unable to hold my attention. The grandfather clock continued its relentless ticking, each second a reminder that time was both my ally and enemy. And then it happened, the moment I had dreaded since the whispers first began. As the wind howled through the trees outside, I heard it. Footsteps on the staircase. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakable, they echoed through the house with a malevolent certainty that chilled me to the bone. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest like a frantic drumbeat. Every rational thought fled my mind, replaced by a primal fear that screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stay where I was. But curiosity, That dangerous and persistent foe compelled me to listen further. The footsteps grew louder, each step a haunting reminder of the unseen presence that shared my home. They climbed the stairs with a measured pace, as if whoever or whatever was ascending knew exactly where they were going. I held my breath, straining to hear every nuance of the sound. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was it an intruder, a ghost, or perhaps something far worse? An entity that defied explanation and thrived on fear? I couldn't ignore it any longer. Grabbing the flashlight from the side table, I stood up, my legs trembling with a mix of adrenaline and terror. The house seemed to shift around me, the walls leaning in as if eager to witness what would happen next. With the flashlight gripped tightly in my hand, I made my way towards the staircase. Each step a struggle against the instinct to flee. The living room felt impossibly large, shadows stretching and twisting as if alive. I glanced back at the grandfather clock, its face an impassive observer to my plight, its hands creeping ever onward. The closer I got to the staircase, the louder the footsteps became, echoing off the wooden walls in a sinister symphony. I shone the flashlight up the stairs, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. There was nothing. No figure standing at the top, no shadowy form lurking in the gloom, just the empty landing, silent and mocking. But the footsteps continued, descending now, each step a taunt that challenged my sanity. I backed away, heart racing, as the reality of the situation sank in. I was alone, and yet I wasn't. The house, with its hidden corridors and ancient wood, was a stage for something far beyond my understanding. I stumbled backward, a flashlight shaking in my grip, casting erratic patterns across the walls. My mind screamed for an escape, a way out of this waking nightmare. I needed to get out, to run as far and as fast as I could, away from the house and its spectral inhabitants. But the storm outside raged on, the rain lashing against the windows with a ferocity that promised no reprieve. Leaving seemed impossible, yet staying felt like a death sentence. Caught between fear and logic, I hesitated, unsure of which path to take. And then, in that moment of indecision, footsteps stopped. Silence fell over the house, oppressive and complete, as if the very walls held their breath in anticipation. I stood there, alone in the gloom, knowing that whatever inhabited the house was not done with me yet. As I turned to flee, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. They surrounded me, their ghostly chorus rising from every corner of the house, filling the air with an urgency that defied understanding. "Don't go," they pleaded, each word dripping with a haunting allure that pulled at the edges of my consciousness. "Stay." But I knew better. I couldn't stay. Not here, not with the unseen eyes that watched my every move, and the voices that sought to ensnare my mind. With a final glance at the empty staircase, I turned and fled, leaving behind the whispers and the shadows that had claimed my home. As I bolted for the front door, the whispers faded into the distance, swallowed by the storm outside. I burst into the night, the rain a welcome assault on my senses, grounding me in the reality of my escape. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the property. Breathless and soaked to the bone, the house loomed behind me, its dark silhouette a reminder of the horrors I had left behind. But even as I turned my back on it, I knew the house's whispers would follow me, a lingering echo of a nightmare that refused to end. The rain lashed down with a vengeance, soaking me to the bone as I stumbled away from the house. Each drop felt like a needle pricking my skin, a cold reminder that I was no longer sheltered within the walls of my childhood home. But the rain was a welcome punishment, one that kept me grounded in reality as I fled from the nightmares that had taken root there. With each step away from the house, a heavy weight lifted from my shoulders, replaced by an equally suffocating sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers had followed me, clinging to my thoughts like a stubborn shadow. They echoed in my mind, a ghostly refrain that played on repeat. "Don't go. Stay." As I trudged through the downpour, my clothes clinging to me like a second skin, I felt the familiar grip of anxiety tighten around my chest. It was as if the storm itself conspired to keep me trapped in its embrace, each gust of wind pushing me back toward the very place I sought to escape. My destination was clear, my grandmother's house, a sanctuary from the horrors of the wooden house. She lived a few miles away, her modest cottage nestled within a grove of trees that whispered secrets of their own. It was a place of warmth and safety, a haven where the shadows dared not tread. As I walked, memories from my childhood surfaced, unbidden and vivid. I recalled the countless times I had visited my grandmother, her gentle smile and reassuring presence, a balm against the fears that plagued my young mind. Her house had always been a refuge, a place where the world's troubles seemed to melt away. But tonight, the journey felt interminable. Each step a struggle against the forces that sought to pull me back. The path to her house wound through a dense forest, the trees looming overhead like ancient sentinels. The rain turned the trail into a treacherous mire, each step sinking into the mud as if the earth itself conspired to hold me captive. As I navigated the twisting path, the storm continued its relentless assault, the wind howling through the trees like a mournful chorus. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the forest in stark relief, casting long shadows that danced with malicious intent. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a deep, ominous growl that resonated within me, amplifying the fear that refused to release its grip. I tried to focus on my grandmother's house, imagining the warm glow of her kitchen, the comforting aroma of her freshly baked bread, the soft hum of her radio playing old songs. These thoughts became a beacon in the darkness, guiding me forward despite the odds stacked against me. Yet, even as I sought solace in these memories, doubt crept in. What if the whispers weren't confined to the house? What if they followed me, a curse that refused to be left behind? The thought gnawed at the edges of my sanity, threatening to unravel the fragile composure I clung to. I shook my head, trying to dispel the dark thoughts. It was just an old house, I told myself, a relic of a bygone era, filled with stories and secrets that had long since faded into obscurity. But deep down, I knew the truth. The house was alive, and its whispers were a testament to something far more sinister. As I continued my journey, the storm intensified, the rain now a torrent that threatened to obscure my path entirely. Each step became a battle, my legs growing weary under the relentless assault. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees leaning in as if eager to hear the whispers that haunted my mind. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder split the air, followed by a blinding flash of lightning that illuminated the forest in stark, eerie detail. For a brief moment, I saw something, or someone, standing amidst the trees, a dark silhouette that vanished as quickly as it appeared. A jolt of terror surged through me, my heart racing as I frantically scanned the shadows for any sign of the figure. But there was nothing, just the endless rain and the rustling leaves swaying in the wind. My rational mind screamed that it was just a trick of the light, a phantom conjured by my fear-addled brain. Yet a part of me, a small, insistent voice, warned that I was not alone. I quickened my pace, the mud sucking at my shoes with every step. The rain poured down harder, each drop stinging like icy needles against my skin. I had to keep moving, had to reach my grandmother's house before whatever haunted the woods caught up to me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, trees parted to reveal the familiar outline of her cottage, its windows glowing warmly in the storm's gloom. Relief washed over me, a tidal wave that threatened to sweep me away in its wake. I staggered toward the front door, the weight of the night's terrors pressing heavily on my shoulders. As I reached the doorstep, I hesitated, glancing back at the path I had traveled. The forest lay silent, the storm's fury reduced to a distant murmur. But I could still feel it, the presence lurking just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. With a shiver, I turned away, pushing open the door and stepping into the safety of my grandmother's home. The warmth enveloped me, a soothing balm against the chill that had seeped into my bones. I let out a shaky breath, grateful for the sanctuary that lay within these familiar walls. But as I settled into the comfort of the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. The whispers might have faded, but their memory lingered, constant reminder of the horrors I had left behind. And as I sat there, listening to the rain tap against the windows like ghostly fingers, I knew that this was not the end. The wooden house, with its whispers and shadows, had become a part of me, a dark thread woven into the fabric of my existence. It was a presence I could not escape, no matter how far I ran or how desperately I tried to forget. The house had whispered its secrets to me, and now they were mine to bear. For the rest of the night, I lay awake in my grandmother's guest room, the shadows stretching across the ceiling like a dark tapestry. Sleep eluded me, my mind replaying the events of the evening over and over, each memory more vivid than the last. As the hours passed, I found myself listening for the whispers, half expecting them to creep into the room, like an unwelcome guest. But they remained silent, phantom lurking just beyond the edge of awareness, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. Morning finally arrived, the storm having spent its fury and leaving behind a world washed clean by the rain. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting a golden light that dispelled the night's shadows. But even in the light of day, the fear lingered. Constant reminder that the house's whispers were never truly gone. I spent the morning with my grandmother, her presence a comforting balm against the anxiety that simmered beneath the surface. But as I prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something awaited me back at the wooden house. A secret I had yet to uncover, a truth that refused to be silent. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind filled with questions, I made my way back home, knowing that the whispers had woven their way into my soul. The house, with its creaking floors and haunting voices, was a part of me now, and there was no escaping its grasp. As I approached the wooden house, its weathered facade looming large against the sky, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. The whispers might have fallen silent, but I knew they were merely biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to make their presence known once more. With a deep breath, I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty halls. The house was silent, save for the distant ticking of the grandfather clock, hands moving ever forward, and in that silence, I knew that the story was far from over. Whispers had begun, and they were far from finished. The wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as I stepped into the house, the sound resonating through the empty hallways like a long-forgotten echo. The air inside was heavy and oppressive, thick with an invisible presence that clung to the walls and shadowed my every step. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, its ancient bones whispering secrets that only I could hear. Despite the morning light streaming through the windows, casting golden rays across the floor, a chill settled over me. The house seemed to breathe, its sighs woven into the very fabric of its being. Each creak, each groan of the wood felt like a voice, low and insistent, whispering warnings that only I could comprehend. I paused at the base of the staircase, where the memory of the footsteps lingered like a phantom. The previous night's terror was fresh in my mind, the sound of those deliberate steps echoing in my ears. I glanced up, half expecting to see a shadowy figure at the top, waiting for me to make the first move. But the landing was empty, the silence only broken by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock. Yet, even as I stood there, an unshakable sense of unease settled over me. It was as if the house knew my fears and reveled in them, each creak and groan a testament to the secrets it held. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever awaited me, and began my ascent. The stairs protested under my weight, each step a reminder of the ancient wood's age and the countless footsteps that had trod this path before me. I reached the top, my heart pounding like a drum, and found myself standing before the narrow hallway that stretched out like a dark corridor into the unknown. The hallway was lined with closed doors, their wooden frames worn and warped by time. They stood like sentinels, silent guardians of whatever lay beyond. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the house's history pressing down upon me, its secrets buried deep within its walls. My gaze drifted to the door at the end of the hall, the one that led to the attic. It loomed in the shadows, a dark portal to the unknown that both beckoned and repelled. The attic was a place I rarely ventured, a realm of forgotten memories and dust-laden relics from another era. It was a place that harbored the past in its musty embrace, and I couldn't help but feel that it held the answers to the questions that plagued me. The whispers had fallen silent, but their absence was more unsettling than their presence. It was as if they were waiting, biding their time until I uncovered whatever truths lay hidden within the house's walls. I had to know. I had to confront the shadows that lurked in the corners of my mind and the corners of this ancient dwelling. Summoning every ounce of courage, I approached the attic door, my heart a steady rhythm of anxiety and determination. The doorknob was cold and unyielding beneath my hand, wood creaking as I turned it. The door swung open with a reluctant groan, revealing the narrow staircase that led into darkness. A stale, musty scent wafted from the depths of the attic, a testament to years of neglect and forgotten memories. The wooden steps protested under my weight as I ascended, each creak and groan a symphony of dread that echoed in the confined space. At the top of the stairs, the attic sprawled before me, a cavernous expanse of shadows and dust. Cobwebs clung to the rafters like ghostly shrouds, and the air was thick with the scent of old wood and decay. Sunlight filtered through a small, grimy window, casting long, slanting beams across the cluttered space. I hesitated at the threshold, my breath catching in my throat. The attic was a repository of the past, filled with relics from a bygone era. Old furniture draped in sheets, boxes stacked haphazardly, and forgotten treasures left to gather dust. It was a place steeped in history, its secrets whispered by the wind that slipped through the cracks. As I stepped deeper into the attic, the floorboards creaked in protest, their groans reverberating through the air like the plaintive cries of a long-lost soul. The whispers, though silent, seemed to linger in the corners, waiting to reveal their hidden truths. My eyes scanned the clutter, seeking something, anything, that might explain the house's mysterious hold over me. Dust-covered boxes stood like sentinels, their contents hidden beneath layers of neglect. I approached one, brushing away the years of grime to reveal its secret. Inside, I found an assortment of old photographs, yellowed with age and frayed at the edges. They depicted scenes from the past, moments frozen in time. Families posed in stiff formality, children playing in sun-drenched fields, and gatherings held within the very walls of this house. One photograph caught my attention, a black and white image of the house itself, its wooden facade familiar yet hauntingly different. In the foreground stood a family, their faces blurred by time, but their expressions unmistakable: pride, happiness, and something else. Something that sent a shiver down my spine. Fear. As I studied the photograph, a sense of recognition washed over me. The figures seemed to reach out from the past, their eyes locked onto mine, as if trying to convey a message that transcended the barriers of time. The whispers may have fallen silent, but the photograph spoke volumes. I placed the photograph back in the box, my mind reeling with question. Who were these people? What connection did they have to the house, and why did their image haunt me so? The attic offered no answers, only more mysteries that deepened the shadows in my mind. As I turned away, a faint sound reached my ears, a soft, insistent rustling, like the pages of a book being turned by unseen hands. My pulse quickened, and I followed the sound to a corner of the attic where a small, dusty chest sat hidden beneath a shroud of cobwebs. The chest was unremarkable, its wood aged and its metal fittings tarnished by time. Yet, as I approached, a sense of foreboding settled over me, a warning that resonated with every fiber of my being. Despite the unease that clawed at my insides, I knelt before the chest, my hands trembling as I reached for the latch. The rusted metal protested with a reluctant screech as I lifted the lid, revealing the contents within. Inside lay a collection of journals, their pages yellowed and fragile, filled with a spidery script that danced across the paper, like an ancient incantation. The words seemed to leap from the pages, speaking directly to my soul. I picked up one of the journals, my fingers tracing the faded ink as I read the words that had been penned so long ago. The entries were filled with accounts of strange occurrences within the house, whispers in the night, shadows that moved of their own accord, and an overwhelming sense of dread that permeated every corner. As I read, a chill crept up my spine, the words resonating with my own experiences. The journal spoke of a presence, an unseen entity that lingered within the house, feeding off fear and despair. It was as if the house itself was alive, its whispers a manifestation of the dark force that dwelled within. The more I read, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The whispers, the shadows, the haunting footsteps. They were all connected to something far more sinister than I had imagined. The house was not just a structure of wood and nails. It was a vessel for a malevolent force that defied explanation. A sudden creak shattered the silence, and I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound seemed to come from the shadows beyond, a reminder that I was not alone in the attic. I placed the journal back into the chest, my mind racing with the implications of what I had discovered. I knew then that the whispers were not merely the product of an overactive imagination or the quirks of an old house. They were a warning, a plea from those who had come before, urging me to heed their fate. The house was a prison, and I was its captive, ensnared by the whispers that sought to claim my soul. With a trembling resolve, I closed the chest, sealing away the secrets of the past. The attic's shadows seemed to press in around me, as if reluctant to let me leave. But I had no choice. The whispers had revealed their truth, and I could no longer ignore the darkness that loomed over me. As I descended the attic stairs, each step resonated with the weight of the knowledge I now possessed. The house, with its ancient secrets and hidden horrors, had become a part of me, its whispers echoing in the recesses of my mind. I had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay as I stepped into the hallway, the attic door closing behind me with a final echoing thud. The house seemed to hold its breath, the silence more oppressive than ever, as if waiting to see what I would do next. But I knew there was no turning back. The whispers had woven their way into my soul, and the house, with its dark secrets and hidden terrors, was now a part of my reality. I was no longer just a resident. I was a witness, keeper of the shadows that lurked within its walls. And as I stood there, the weight of the house's history pressing down upon me, I realized that the whispers were far from finished. They were merely biding their time, waiting for the moment when the shadows would rise once more and the truth would be laid bare. The days that followed my discovery in the attic were a blur of fear and confusion. My mind was a tangled web of whispers and shadows, the events of that night replaying over and over in an endless loop. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the windows felt like a reminder of the unseen presence that lingered in the house. It was as if the walls were closing in, suffocating me in their silent embrace. Sleep became elusive, a fragile thing that slipped through my fingers the moment I closed my eyes. The whispers haunted my dreams, filling the darkness with their relentless murmuring. I would awaken in a cold sweat, the sheets tangled around me like a shroud, echoes of the night reverberating in my ears. The house, once a place of safety and familiarity, had become a prison. Its wooden frame, once comforting, now seemed alive with a malevolent energy that defied explanation. I could feel its gaze upon me, constant, oppressive presence that weighed heavily on my every move. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a reminder of the history that lay hidden within its walls. In those sleepless nights, I found myself pacing the creaking floorboards, my footsteps a soft echo in the stillness. The house seemed to respond to my presence, its whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if urging me to uncover the truths that lay buried within its depth. It was a call I couldn't ignore, a siren song that pulled me deeper into its clutches. I knew I couldn't face the darkness alone, and so I confided in my grandmother, the one person who had always believed in the inexplicable. She listened with a quiet intensity as I recounted the events of that fateful night. Footsteps on the stairs, the shadows that danced in the corners of my vision, and the whispers that spoke of secrets I couldn't comprehend. Her eyes, filled with a wisdom that seemed to transcend time, met mine. "There are things in this world we cannot explain," said softly, her voice a balm to my frayed nerves. "The house has a history, a past that reaches beyond our understanding. You must find a way to make peace with it." Her words lingered in my mind, a beacon of hope amidst the storm of fear that raged within me. But how does one make peace with something so intangible, so rooted in the shadows? I was at a loss, trapped in a cycle of uncertainty and dread. The whispers, ever present, seemed to mock my attempts at understanding. They filled the silence with their insidious murmurings, weaving their way into the fabric of my thoughts. It was as if they were alive, a living entity, fed on my fear and despair. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the house's presence grew unbearable. I could feel its tendrils reaching into every corner of my life, tainting my every thought, action. It was as if the house had claimed me as its own, an unwilling captive in its labyrinthine embrace. I began to notice changes in the environment around me, subtle shifts that hinted at something far more sinister than I had initially imagined. Objects would move of their own accord, slipping from their places, as if guided by unseen hand. The air crackled with an unseen electricity, palpable tension that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Whispers grew louder, their voices a cacophony of sound that resonated within my skull. They spoke of things I couldn't comprehend, words in a language that felt both familiar and alien. It was as if the house itself was trying to communicate, to impart some ancient knowledge that defied human understanding. The strain took its toll, eroding my sense of reality and blurring the lines between the seen and unseen. I found myself questioning my own sanity, wondering if the whispers were merely a figment of my imagination, manifestation of my deepest fears. In my desperation, I turned to the journals I had discovered in the attic. Their pages, filled with the scrawled accounts of those who had come before me, offered a glimpse into the minds of others who had walked this path. They spoke of encounters with the supernatural, of spirits that lingered in the shadows, and entities that defied explanation. One entry in particular caught my eye, a passage penned by a previous inhabitant who had lived in the house long before my time. The words were written in a shaky hand, ink faded but still legible. The whispers speak of the past, things long forgotten but never truly gone. They are the echoes of those who once lived here, the voices of the restless dead who refuse to be silenced. The house is their sanctuary, and they will not be denied. Entry sent a chill down my spine, confirming what I had long suspected. The whispers were not merely an echo of the house's history, but a living force, manifestation of the souls that lingered within its walls. Armed with this newfound understanding, I realized that I had to confront the shadows that haunted me. I could no longer live in fear. Prisoner of the house's insidious grip, I needed to break free, to find a way to release the spirits that held sway over the dwelling. With a determination born of desperation, I set about researching ways to cleanse the house, to rid it of the entities that had claimed it as their own. I delved into books on the supernatural, seeking answers in ancient texts and rituals that promised to banish the unseen forces. The process was slow and painstaking. I persevered, driven by the hope of reclaiming my life from the clutches of the house. I gathered the necessary tools: sage for smudging, salt for purification, and a handful of protective herbs that were said to ward off malevolent spirits. The day of the cleansing arrived, and I prepared myself for the task ahead. The air was heavy with anticipation, the house eerily silent as if holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. I moved through the rooms, the scent of burning sage trailing in my wake, the smoke curling into the air like tendrils of mist. I spoke words of power, ancient incantations that resonated with the energy of the house, calling upon the spirits to release their hold. The air crackled with an unseen force, the whispers rising in a crescendo of sound that echoed through the halls. As I completed the ritual, a palpable shift occurred, a change in the very atmosphere of the house. The air grew lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung over me, lifting like a fog, burned away by the sun. The whispers, once a constant presence, faded into silence, leaving only the echoes of their passing. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of relief. A weight lifted from my shoulders as the house released its hold. It was as if the shadows had finally been laid to rest, their voices silenced by the cleansing power of the ritual. The house, once a place of terror and unease, had become a sanctuary once more. Its wooden frame, steeped in history and memory, now felt welcoming, a place of safety and solace. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, breaking free from the chains that had bound me. But even as I reveled in my newfound freedom, I knew that the experience had left an indelible mark on my soul. The whispers, though silenced, lingered in the recesses of my mind, a reminder of the darkness that had once consumed me. The house, with its hidden secrets and untold stories, would always be a part of me, testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of the unknown. And as I stood in the quiet stillness of the house, the sunlight streaming through the windows like a benediction, I realized that I had not just survived. I had triumphed. I had faced the shadows and emerged from the other side, forever changed but unbroken. The House of Whispers had become a house of peace, its secrets finally laid to rest. And though the past would never truly be forgotten, I knew that I had found the strength to move forward, to embrace the future with open arms. Closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the sun wash over me, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude to the spirits that had guided me through the darkness. The house, with its haunted history and whispered tales, had become a part of my story. A story of survival, of courage, and of the enduring power of the human spirit. I'm not the same person I used to be. Anxiety clings to me like a shadow. I can't stand being alone. It all started that one fateful day after school, a day that changed everything. It was a typical Wednesday, and I got home from school around 4 p.m. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the driveway of our 2-story suburban house. The neighborhood was quiet as usual. I remember feeling a strange sense of unease as I approached the front door, but I brushed it off. I just wanted to get inside and relax. As soon as I stepped into the house, I noticed a note on the kitchen table. It was from my parents, written in my mom's neat handwriting. They had gone to visit my grandparents and wouldn't be back until late. I sighed, a bit annoyed that they hadn't told me earlier, but it wasn't a big deal, or so I thought. By 4:30 p.m., I started to notice that the house felt different. It was colder than usual, and there was an unsettling quiet. I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV, but the remote wasn't where I usually left it. Strange, but maybe I'd misplaced it. Then I heard it. A thud from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen. My heart rate spiked. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe something had just fallen off a shelf. But then the noises continued. Footsteps, doors creaking. It felt like someone else was in the house. 5 p.m., the phone rang. I rushed to answer it, desperate for some kind of normalcy. "Hello?" I said, but there was no reply. The silence, and then, faintly, sound of breathing. I hung up, my hands shaking. When it rang again, I let it go to voicemail. The caller ID was just a string of zeros. By this point, my anxiety was through the roof. I tried calling my parents, but my phone had no signal. The noises were getting louder. I heard whispering, objects moving, and the unmistakable sound of someone climbing the stairs. I was paralyzed with fear, not sure if I should hide or run. At 6 p.m., I saw them. Shadowy figures, moving just out of sight. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to my room, locked the door, and hid under my bed, clutching a baseball bat I kept for emergencies. I stayed there, shaking and crying, until I heard the front door open. My parents found me hours later, still hiding, still terrified. They tried to comfort me, but I couldn't explain what had happened. I was a mess. Now, I'm on medication for my anxiety. I see a therapist regularly, but no matter what I do, I can't shake the feeling of dread that follows me. That day, something changed in me. The house that was once my safe haven became a place of nightmares. And the worst part? I still don't know if it was all in my head or if something truly sinister happened that day. But one thing's for sure, I'll never feel safe alone again. I clutched the note from my parents, reading it over and over, hoping for some comfort in their familiar handwriting, but instead it felt like a farewell letter. The house was so quiet it was oppressive. Normally I'd revel in the silence, but today it was suffocating. I tossed my backpack onto the couch and glanced at the clock. It was 4:30 p.m. I figured I'd make a snack and try to relax. Kitchen felt colder than usual, the chill creeping up my spine. I grabbed a sandwich and headed to the living room. That's when I heard it. A thud from upstairs, like something heavy had been dropped. My heart skipped a beat. I stood there, frozen, listening intently. Nothing. Maybe it was just the house settling. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the unease. I turned on the TV to drown out the silence, but I couldn't find the remote. It wasn't in its usual spot on the coffee table. Annoyed, I searched the cushions, floor, everywhere. It was gone. The unease was growing, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I decided to go upstairs and check. As I ascended the stairs, each creak under my feet felt amplified, echoing through the house. When I reached the top, I saw my bedroom door slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered closing it that morning. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Everything seemed normal. My bed was made, my desk cluttered with schoolwork, but nothing out of place. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd. The window was open, letting in a chilly breeze. I never left my window open. I shut it, feeling a shiver run through me. As I turned to leave, the phone rang downstairs, its shrill tones slicing through the silence. I rushed down, nearly tripping over the last step. Grabbed the receiver, my hand trembling. "Hello?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was no response, just silence. Then faintly, I heard breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing. My stomach twisted in fear. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. Phone rang again almost immediately. I didn't answer. Instead, I stared at the caller ID. It was just a string of zeros. I felt like I was in a horror movie, kind where you scream at the character not to answer the phone. But this was real. Too real. I needed to get out of the house. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard footsteps upstairs again. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was in the house. Someone who shouldn't be there. Panic surged through me. I tried calling my parents, but my phone had no signal. I was trapped, alone, and terrified. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer. I darted into the kitchen, looking for anything to defend myself. I grabbed a knife, holding it tightly, my knuckles white. The house felt like it was closing in on me. Shadows danced on the walls, the temperature dropping even further. I heard whispering, soft at first, then growing louder. It was coming from all around me. My head was spinning. I needed to hide. I ran upstairs to my room, slamming the door shut and locking it. I crawled under the bed, clutching the knife to my chest. My heart was racing, every sound magnified. The footsteps stopped outside my door. The handle rattled, and I bit back a scream. Whoever or whatever was out there tried the door, finding it locked. They whispered something unintelligible, and then the footsteps retreated. I stayed there, under the bed, shaking as the minutes dragged into hours. When my parents finally came home, they found me curled up under the bed, clutching a knife, my eyes wide with fear. They pulled me out, but I was too shaken to speak. I just pointed to the note, the only clue to what had happened. They didn't understand, and I couldn't explain. All I knew was that the house was no longer safe. Something had invaded our home, and it had left a mark on me. A mark that would never fade. To this day, I can't stay alone. The fear follows me, a constant reminder of that night. The house that was once my sanctuary became my prison, and I'm still trying to find a way out. The days following that night were a blur. My parents tried to comfort me, but how could they understand the terror I felt? I was afraid to be alone, afraid of the shadows that seemed to grow darker, longer. Every noise, every creak of the house sent shivers down my spine. A week later, I stayed home from school, claiming I was sick. My parents reluctantly agreed, leaving me alone in the house again. It was around 10 a.m. when the quiet settled in, heavy, suffocating silence. I tried to distract myself with homework, but my mind kept wandering back to that night. I decided to clean my room, hoping the activity would help. As I moved around, I felt like I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there. I was always alone. Or so I thought. By noon, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I went downstairs to make lunch, trying to ignore the creeping fear. The kitchen was bright with daylight, but it felt cold, lifeless. I made a sandwich and sat at the table trying to calm my nerves. Then, I heard it again. The same thud from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat and I dropped my sandwich. The sound was followed by footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above me. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the knife I had used to make my sandwich, clutching it tightly. Crept towards the stairs, every step feeling like a journey through a nightmare. Footsteps continued, pausing at the top of the stairs. I could see the shadow of something moving, but I couldn't make out what it was. I felt paralyzed, trapped between wanting to flee and needing to know what was happening. Suddenly the phone rang, shattering the silence. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I ran to the phone, hoping it was my parents. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the same heavy breathing. I hung up and dialed my mom's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Desperation clawed at me. I tried my dad's phone next, but there was no answer. I was completely alone. Footsteps started again, ascending the stairs slowly, methodically. I backed away, knife in hand, trying to keep my breathing steady. The shadow on the wall grew larger as it reached the bottom step. I had to hide. I bolted into the living room and slid under the couch, pulling the knife close to me. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. I watched the doorway, waiting, praying that whatever was out there wouldn't find me. The footsteps entered the room, soft but deliberate. I saw the shadow stretch across the floor, and then I saw feet. Pale, almost ghostly feet, moving slowly. I bit my lip, holding back a scream. The figure stopped in the middle of the room, standing still as if listening. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Minutes felt like hours as I lay there, waiting. Finally, the footsteps moved again, heading towards the kitchen. I heard the back door creak open and then close softly. I didn't move, afraid it was a trick that it would come back. After what felt like an eternity, I crawled out from under the couch. The house was silent again, but the air felt heavy, charged with fear. I knew I couldn't stay here. I ran to the front door, flinging it open, and bolted outside. The bright sunlight was a stark contrast to the darkness inside the house. I ran to a neighbor's house, pounding on the door, tears streaming down my face. They took me in, calling my parents and the police. When my parents arrived, they found me curled up on the neighbor's couch, still clutching the knife. They tried to console me, but the fear wouldn't leave. The police searched the house, finding nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else being there. They chalked it up to my imagination, stress from school, maybe even a prank. But I knew better. I knew something was in that house, something that wasn't human. My parents tried to be understanding, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was overreacting, that I was letting my anxiety get the best of me. But I knew the truth. That house wasn't safe, and neither was I. After that day, my parents started to work from home more often. They said it was to keep an eye on me, to help with my anxiety, but I knew they were worried. Worried that I was losing my mind. I wished it was just that, an overactive imagination, a teenager's stress. But deep down, I knew something sinister lurked in the shadows of our home. It was a Friday night, around 8 p.m. My parents had gone out for a rare date night, leaving me alone again. I tried to keep myself busy, distracting myself with homework and video games. The house felt normal for once, almost comforting. But as the night wore on, a familiar sense of dread began to creep in. By 9 p.m., the unease was impossible to ignore. I heard the soft creak of floorboards above me, the same deliberate footsteps I'd come to fear. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, asking when they'd be back. No response. Felt the fear tighten around my chest like a vice. I decided to go upstairs and check things out, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The staircase felt like it stretched on forever, each step echoing in the silence. When I reached the top, I noticed my bedroom door was slightly ajar. Again. I pushed the door open slowly, heart pounding in my ears. The room was dark, shadows dancing on the walls. I turned on the light, expecting to see something, anything that could explain the noises. But the room was empty, just like before. I walked over to the window, checking the latch. It was locked, just as I'd left it. As I turned to leave, the phone rang downstairs, its shrill tones slicing through the stillness. I hesitated, then hurried down to answer it. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper. There was no response, just the faint sound of static. And then, the breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing. I felt my blood run cold. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The line went dead. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. I needed to get out of the house, but I was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the house into darkness for a few seconds before coming back on. That's when I saw it. Figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, shrouded in shadow. My heart stopped. It was tall, its features obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet, desperate to put distance between us. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. The phone rang again, but I didn't dare answer it. I was trapped, and the only thing I could do was fight. With the knife in hand, I edged towards the front door. The figure remained still, almost daring me to make a move. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I reached for the doorknob, my hands slick with sweat. Just as I was about to open it, the figure vanished. I spun around, knife raised, but the hallway was empty. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I couldn't stay here. I flung the door open and ran outside, cool night air hitting me like a wave of relief. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house. I banged on the door, shouting for help. They let me in, and I collapsed on their couch, shaking and sobbing. When my parents returned, they found me in the same state as before, terrified and clinging to a knife. Police came again, and once more they found nothing. No signs of anyone else in the house, no evidence of a break-in. They suggested it was stress, maybe a vivid nightmare. But I knew better. That figure, that presence, it was real. My parents were at a loss. They didn't know how to help me, how to protect me from something they couldn't see. The house felt like a prison, and I was trapped within its walls, haunted by a presence that refused to leave. The fear consumed me, day and night, a relentless reminder that I was never truly alone. The weeks that followed were a descent into madness. My parents, desperate to help, arranged for me to see a therapist. They hoped it would calm my nerves, but every session only dredged up more fear, more memories of that shadowy figure. The therapist told me it was my anxiety manifesting in terrifying ways. But I knew it was real. I could feel its presence lurking in the corners, watching, waiting. One night, around 11 p.m., I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, but the silence felt alive, thrumming with anticipation. I couldn't sleep, couldn't relax. Every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge. My parents were downstairs watching TV, oblivious to the terror that gripped me. As I lay there, I heard it, a soft whisper, almost imperceptible, coming from the closet. My heart stopped. I strained to hear, but the whispering ceased. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But then, the whispering started again, growing louder, more insistent. I couldn't ignore it. I sat up, clutching the blankets, my eyes fixed on the closet door. It was closed, but I could see a faint light seeping from beneath it. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I had to check, to face whatever was hiding in there. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet touching the cold floor. Slowly, I crept towards the closet, each step feeling like a mile. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grasped the doorknob. As I turned it, the whispering stopped. I flung the door open, expecting to see the shadowy figure, but the closet was empty. Just clothes and shoes, nothing out of the ordinary. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. Then, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. I heard footsteps, soft but deliberate, moving towards me. My heart raced, and I backed away, stumbling over my own feet. The lights came back on, and I saw it. Figure, standing at the foot of my bed, its features obscured but its presence undeniable. I screamed, primal sound that tore through the silence. My parents burst into the room, their faces pale with fear. They saw me standing there, pointing at the empty space where the figure had been. They tried to calm me, but I couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop the tears streaming down my face. The next day, they called a priest, hoping to cleanse the house of whatever was haunting me. He came with holy water and prayers, walking through each room, chanting in Latin. I watched, hopeful but skeptical. Could this really banish the darkness that had taken hold of our home? For a while, it seemed to work. The house felt lighter, the air less oppressive. I started to relax, believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The figure wasn't gone. It was just waiting. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of music. A soft, eerie tune that filled the room. I sat up, my heart pounding. The music was coming from downstairs. Crept out of bed, my feet barely making a sound on the carpet. As I descended the stairs, the music grew louder, more haunting. In the living room, I saw it. An old record player, spinning a vinyl record. The needle was moving on its own, playing a melody I'd never heard before. I stepped closer, mesmerized by the sound. That's when I saw the shadowy figure standing in the corner, watching me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure moved towards me, slowly, deliberately. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed with fear. It reached out, its hand almost touching me. I could feel the cold radiating from it, seeping into my bones. Just as it was about to touch me, the lights flickered and the figure vanished. The record player stopped, the needle lifting off the vinyl. I stood there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My parents found me moments later, standing in the living room, tears streaming down my face. They didn't understand, and I couldn't explain. The terror was real. Figure was real. And it wasn't going away. It was only getting stronger, more insistent. I knew that it was only a matter of time before it claimed me completely, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Following days were a blur of fear and exhaustion. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. A shadowy figure haunted my every waking moment, lurking just out of sight, always watching. My parents were at a loss, their concern growing with each passing day. One evening, around 6 p.m., I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of desperation, I made my way to the basement. The place I had always avoided, the place where the darkness felt most alive. The basement door creaked open, revealing a set of stairs that descended into pitch black. I took a deep breath and began my descent, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown, the air growing colder and heavier with each passing second. When I reached the bottom, the basement was eerily quiet. Flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I could see old boxes, dusty furniture, and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. Felt like another world, a world where the shadowy figure thrived. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" My words echoed in the silence, but there was no response. Just the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing down on me. Suddenly, the flashlight went out, plunging me into complete darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with the flashlight, trying to get it to work, but it was dead. I could feel the cold presence of the figure closing in, the air growing colder with each passing second. Then, I heard it, the whispering, soft, insidious, surrounding me from all sides. It was speaking in a language I didn't understand, the words like a dark melody seeping into my mind. I felt a chill run down my spine, the fear gripping me tighter than ever before. I turned to run, but the darkness felt alive, almost tangible, like a black fog enveloping me. I stumbled, falling to the ground. As I scrambled to get up, I felt a cold hand grip my ankle. I screamed, kicking out, but the grip tightened, pulling me back. I was dragged across the floor, my nails scraping against the concrete. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, as if urging the figure to claim me. I kicked and thrashed, trying to break free, but it was no use. The darkness was too strong. Just as I felt myself slipping into despair, bright light flooded the basement. My father stood at the top of the stairs, his face pale with fear. He rushed down, pulling me free from the invisible grip. The moment his hand touched mine, the darkness retreated. The whispering stopped. He dragged me up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind us. We collapsed in the living room, both of us shaking, trying to comprehend what had just happened. My mother joined us, her face etched with worry. We didn't speak, the silence heavy with unspoken fear. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up to keep the terror coming. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring even more spine-tingling content your way. Before you go, don't forget to check out the video playing on the screen. It's packed with more unsettling tales and eerie experiences that you won't want to miss. If you have any frightening stories of your own or suggestions for future content, drop them in the comments below. Stay tuned for more haunting adventures. Until next time, sleep tight. Decant.